let's move on to our final set of songs. Still do have a full 6 of them to go. They are Stranger Things, Drop 5, Panic, Smoke and Mirrors, Dishonorable Discharge, and COTI. So I think the obvious sort of starting point that we need to hit here is talking about Stranger Things off the top, right? We talked about Banks as a former G Unit member, and Stranger Things contains some lyrics which have been suggested by a lot of his fan base to be call outs very directly to 50 Cent, who wrote an evidently incredibly well reviewed book, which was released last year, called Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter. Like, seriously, everywhere that I'm looking, this is like 4.8 stars out of 5. And getting a lot of critical acclaim as well. So I'm maybe half
So,
tempted to pick up with my Audible token one of these here. But
so better received than the 50 Cent game then.
yeah, definitely. I don't think 50 Cent canonically kills himself off at the end of that book. I feel like I would have heard about that. But yeah, in Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter, there is an excerpt where 50 described Banks as lazy. Something that, Cam, you mentioned, Lloyd may not necessarily disagree with, given that he has Lazy Lloyd tattooed on his arm, and the irony of this being literally worn on his sleeve is not lost on Curtis Jackson. But anyway, Lloyd gets his rebuttal in on Stranger Things. Call me quiet, call me lazy. Talent never faded. It's frustrating when your grinding ain't appreciated. Should have been dead in my 20s. Shit, at least I made it. Guess I gotta prove myself again. Increase your payment. It's relatively tame as callouts and rap songs go. There do seem to be some other references in this track too, particularly the chorus. I think you can point out there. I will say before we go too far down this path that Banks did tweet yesterday saying literally just, y'all gotta relax with the reaching, perhaps in reference to some of the speculation around this track. But I'm not going to let facts get in the way of some good Friday clickbait. So I'll ask, were you guys aware at all that, not all was well between Banks and 50? I know that it's not a recent thing, Banks becoming an XG Unit member, and that group does, as far as I can tell, still operate. But yeah, what are you thinking here?
I think it's a very loose operation if it still does
Two
operate. I don't think
artists.
there's been a
Yeah.
G Unit album. Yeah, I mean, was it Tony Ayo and is Tony Ayo still in G Unit? I can't even remember. I don't know, but yeah. I mean, I think to me, it's pretty obviously addressing a lot of things to that, but it didn't really feel like so much of a traditional. Here I'm going to present a rap beef. He called me lazy. I'm going to do a rebuttal. It kind of felt like a lament to a kind of lost friendship in a lot of ways. More to
Mm.
me, a lot of the lyrical themes of this song. It's got the line where it's like, "We'll probably never be as tight as we ever were," kind of thing. So I think there's probably more of that. It might even just be a kind of olive branch situation where he's trying to reach out to Curtis Jackson. Well, I've never called him Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent, but you know what I mean. Yeah, so it kind of felt like that more to me than it ever felt like a diss track or anything like that. So I don't know. It's one of those things, and I think if if you call yourself lazy, that's fine. But if someone else calls you lazy, or someone in a book calls you lazy, you probably feel a little bit differently about it, especially because they worked closely with you, probably saw how hard you worked, etc. And obviously they went on to mega stardom. You got your fair share of fame, and possibly didn't want any more. Like, has anybody ever asked Lloyd Banks if he just was happy with the level of fame he attained and wanted to maybe just sit back and chill? Because I feel like, maybe he made his money and was happy and just wanted to do what he was gonna do rather than kind of put album after album out and become this global megastar that 50 Cent is. So yeah, it's kind of a difficult one. I think he addresses a lot of those themes in this song in particular. It's one of the kind of more obvious standout lyrical moments in the song. It's slower in its delivery. You get to feel a lot of what
just to really briefly drag you back to the Audible topic, Matt, who do you think would narrate that book?
So,
Because if it's Stephen Fry, if it's Stephen Fry, I think I would be totally down for that.
exactly what I was thinking, right?
Yeah,
What is the appropriate narrator for that book? And part of this is like I list like in terms of the audiobooks I listen to, they're mostly about politics or they are about racing cars and they are normally narrated by old white dudes. Like that's what I've got in my head for an audiobook. I'm just like, really, it's got to be 50 Cent or under his pen name, Curtis. Well, not pen name, his actual name, but he put his name down as Curtis Jackson as the author of that book. But yeah, that's a very good question, Brad. I think on that alone, I'll use my credit there.
yeah, I think that's one to watch for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think the subtlety of this, I mean, as much as it could be construed as a diss track, I guess. I mean, the subtlety of it, I think, makes it more impactful. Like, I hate the way you show me love. There's obviously a really, really close bond here that is, and it happens. It happens. You lose contact with people, or you have a falling out with people, and it's. I think the fact that it's not an all-out like just assault on the guy kind of makes it
Yeah.
slightly more impactful. It slightly like makes it feel more real, like you have lost a friend in a way.
It speaks to a guy that's older, doesn't it? He's not, if this had happened when he was 20, then maybe we get a different track. But it speaks to a guy that's, 39 now, I think he is. So you're probably at that point, and even probably by the point at the age we are now, you like friends have come and gone. Like day ones are still there, some of them aren't, but whatever, you know what I mean, kind of thing. So you kind of like get to a point where you're more mournful about friendships lost, and you kind of respect what you had a bit more rather than kind of being aggressive about it. So it just speaks to a maturity to me that you don't often see in a lot of hip hop songs of this nature. It's unusual to present yourself in this vulnerable kind of manner, and it's quite nice to see. And just to give you an answer, Brad, the narrator of the 50 Cent book, Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter, is Curtis Jackson himself, 50 Cent.
Good.
So you get the man himself narrating that entire book.
I would listen
Yeah,
to
that,
that.
that makes sense.
I would listen to that, I think. Dreadlocks, thank you again. G Unit had a small comeback like 6 years ago or so. Got Young Buck back and added Kid Kid. 50 said G Unit is done since they don't want to work like him. I wouldn't be surprised to hear some form of G Unit again, though, with 50, Yayo, and Banks. Just in answer to our question about where are they these days? That theme of work, I think, very much coming out in the excerpt from 50's book, as you say, that did seem to be sort of his main beef. I think some of the quotes that have been pulled out from articles talking about this do maybe miss some of the nuance because I think again some of the lines later on in the rest of that section of that book do say that 50 does really sort of blame himself a little bit for not helping him through that period, right? And teaching him how to work or managing effectively versus going, as Dreadlocks has alluded to there, just like, you don't want to work like me, and then that's being it. You cut off at that point. Really interesting, and that maturity, I think, comes through on a lot of the other songs on this stretch of the album. Cam, I was talking to you earlier, and we were saying about the lyrical themes that really come out of this. I think one of the great bits about this set of six is how much there is about family, how much about an idealized version of family life that feels so reflective being covered here. Drop 5, great example of that. And this is an album which, don't forget, it's a picture of him holding his young son's hand on the artwork of this album, right? Um, it all feels very reflective. And I think, again, a lot of those family references feel very much like family in terms of blood rather than family in the wider, broader, Fast and Furious type way.
The yeah, I'll not talk about Fast and Furious any longer than I have to. Um, yeah, I mean, it just speaks to a guy that's in that stage of his life, you know. That's what he knows now. It's kind of family. It's kind of where he's at. So it doesn't really kind of paint that much of a picture for me, other than kind of he lives a fairly standard life. Obviously, he's just had this incredible career up to date. So um, again, not something or not the kind of stable version that gets presented in hip hop a lot. It's quite nice to see in a
Yeah.
way. Having said that, kind of by this point get a little bit lost by the repetitive nature, by how long this album is, to really notice a lot of that stuff. Um, it kind of feels like he wanted to say those things. He had those things to say, but maybe lacked the courage to put them earlier in the album because, like I said, they're not traditional themes for a hip hop album. You know, they're quite vulnerable themes in
Yeah.
ways. So perhaps like wanted to bury them a little bit, wanted to say them, but wanted to bury them in less engaging songs. And honestly, by the last 6 tracks of this album, it's so repetitive, and I'm quite bored by this, and it's quite a shame because he remains sharp and engaging throughout the whole thing. He, you know, remains the focal point. Um, but it's a shame that a little bit more bravery wasn't shown and this album wasn't split in two. Um, to have those themes up front and center, to have him up front and center, to have better beats maybe, and better production in places.
Yeah, you know, I you've got more of the tracks. I think in this section where again your focus is quite clearly, unequivocally meant to be on the writing. Smoke and Mirrors, another track that focuses very much on family. It includes a really good line that I think of in the same vein as our discussion yesterday that you and I had about updating historic references for the current day. But I would nominate the line "Judas done finally found my phone number. Why would I call you back?" for inclusion into that category. When yesterday we were talking about that old meme, "What are you gonna do? Stab me?" says man stabbed, as being the eventual replacement for E2 Brute. Yeah, there's a lot of good writing here. I don't think you're necessarily wrong about your focus is gone at this point to a bigger extent. It's rough for me to say. I really, as I say, don't want to put that on the artist because I am so impressed by the themes that are being spoken about here. Even as somebody who is not a student of the genre, those vulnerabilities and that not just yearning for a stable family life and things like that, because you get that a lot, I think, on rap songs. You talk about, or you hear a lot of artists talk about, wanting to be a dad to their kids. But to me, the way it's delivered here sounds very much like he's saying, like, I am, right? Not I want to, I am. And that's really great. But considering I think musically you lose a lot of those hooks that we had early on, they started to wane away a little bit on the second set of tracks. They're almost non-existent here, and please do correct me if I'm wrong. It becomes harder and harder on some of these tracks, which get again longer and longer, and are becoming quite essay-like, but they're very good essays. Very good essays.
That's the thing, man. They're great, but the features are bad at this point in the album. The beats are bad at this point in the album, and they're very repetitive to what we've already had. they sound confused in a lot of places. This is really where Lloyd Banks really. I felt like he just lost his beat selection completely. We had some really good ones earlier in the album, but by this point, it just kind of felt like any old trap beat would do. And I swear that the beat me and Brad were talking about from Commitment, is by track 18, I think we've heard it 4 times, but just pitch shifted in different spots. It it's hard when you don't want to see it. It's really weird to see a guy write an 18-track album and feel like it's still lazy in some places, and obviously see him address that in so many ways, so clearly and obviously, and still be left with the feeling that a lot of what happens in the album is lazy. But towards the end, the beat selection, there's no doubt, gets lazy, and it becomes unengaging because of that, which is a shame. Because, like you said, you miss some of the lyrical highlights for me. Everybody wants to talk about the 50 beef, but you get some of the best lyrics on this run of the album. Certainly, because earlier in the album as well, I don't speak to this too much, but it's kind of much for muchness within hip hop. It's a lot of stuff about his legacy, about how everybody perceives him, which I don't really get because obviously, like I said at the top, is kind of he's kind of a universally liked guy, universally rated as well. So just generic themes, and this is the portion of the album where we get some actually unique themes, but it just happens to coincide with the worst beats, the worst features, and overall the worst songs.
And this is the part of the review where I disagree with both of you.
Hey,
So,
Van Weezer's a good album.
I don't wholeheartedly disagree. I think there are some forgettable beats in this like kind of last stretch of it for sure. I don't necessarily think it's always lazy. I think Stranger Things, there's kind of a lack of beat, and I kind of feel like that's done deliberately to draw your attention into the lyrics. The beat is kind of all over the place. It's kind of chaotic. It ties in with the theme, it ties in with the title. It's a strange beat for a track called Stranger Things. And what it does is make you focus on the lyrical content and the delivery there. Um, Same thing with Smoke and Mirrors. There's no drums, I don't think, throughout the whole thing, or very minimal. And that focuses your attention on the only thing that is really providing like a solid rhythm here, which is the vocals, the rap. Um, Whether it was thought of in that way, whether it was planned out in that way, I don't know. But if it was, it's kind of a stroke of genius, really, to just like draw you in and make you focus on the lyrics there. In terms of like thematically, I think this kind of struck me as Lloyd Banks is that kind of family guy from the start. And if you look at the album cover, I believe that's his son. So I don't really think you could say he's like tried to bury it. I do think it does come out more in the later tracks, but it's a picture of him holding his son's hand on the album cover. Like how buried is that?
Really unfortunate. I think you just stepped away at the point that Cam and I said.
Okay.
We spoke through just this, right? About that theme coming through so strongly here, and tying that in with the album cover. Really, really, it drives home what I think he was trying to do here in that section.
Yeah, it does feel like those themes did kind of come through lyrically later in the album rather than kind of in the beginning. But is that to kind of appeal to the fans more, or is that like a deliberate choice to kind of leave you holding on for those themes? I don't know.
Very good question. Very, very good question. Cam, I want to pick you up on a couple of points, but I think the natural one to start with here potentially is your mention about the features. The Ari the Kid, yeah, okay, I'll give you that. That Vado verse though, I really enjoyed that, and the reason that I did was that it injected some real energy to Dishonorable Discharge, which, at track 17, you need that. You need that in a big way. Um, I've written down that song makes me feel things that I haven't for a while on that album, and I think a lot of it is down to Vado's verse there.
I think by that point it's too little, too late to inject any energy in for me.
Come on, just take that song on its own, right? Remove it from that context.
But you can't remove it from context. That's not what an album's about. And I go back to, is this an album or is it a collection of songs or a mixtape or a playlist? You can't remove it from that context. I have no idea how I would feel about this song if it was a standalone. That's not really a great sign for the quality of an album. You know what I mean? I feel like you should know where you'd feel about a song as a standalone. I take the Wolf Alice album that got released last week. I said to you very openly at the start of it, I didn't like any of the singles, but I've listened to it as an album and it's an absolutely fantastic album as a whole. Um, which is fine because okay, it doesn't work on its own, but it works as a whole, which is great. I don't really know with this what it's trying to do, whether it's trying to be an album, whether it's trying to be a playlist, whether it's trying to be a mixtape, what. So I think just by this point I'm so jaded by the album length that there's nothing that Vado, go back to Fado, Fado could do to bring me back from the brink. And the less said about the Sai Ari the Kid feature, the better, as far as I'm concerned. That was the most trap this album felt. I'm just not for me.
Yeah, auto-tuned kind of vocal hook there is something that I am again not down for at all. It's just kind of makes you think of all the worst things about the genre that are coming out in the minute that you just don't want to listen to. For me personally, obviously it is a taste thing. And like you say, does this work as an album entirely? I'm not entirely sure. Could it be two albums? Quite possibly. It could work better as two albums. Um, I don't know how much of it has to do with the fact that we've had to listen to it quite intensely over a week, though. And I think that is probably a difference that, and something that, people listening to it, without having to listen to it intensively, without having that kind of thought of I have to listen to this X amount of times in the next 7 days, I think maybe that would come off differently if I'd listened to it once when it came out and then given it a break. Would that leave me with a different?
I'll slightly disagree on that just purely because the first time I did listen to this, and we all joked about this in the week, I had no idea what the track length was. And I got to about track 10 or 11, and I was like, wait, why isn't this finished? Why is this still going on? And then saw that it was 18 tracks. And then was like, the doom came over me of, oh no, this is going on for longer than it really should. Um, I don't think there's any doubt that if you're going to release an album, it should work as an album. And I have absolutely no problem with long albums. One of my favorite bands of all time, who will not mention, released a very famous concept double LP, Drink. No problem with the length of that album. It's warranted. There's just nothing that feels warranted about the length of this album. No matter how you want to listen to it, if you want to listen to it intensely over a week, doesn't feel warranted. If you want to casually listen to this, doesn't feel warranted. If you just want it on in the background, eventually it doesn't feel warranted. It's just there's no format for me where this works as an album at its current length. I don't really understand it.
So I'll say I think we're already there. I just want to check in with you guys right here and say, anybody want to say anything more about the final set of 6 songs that we had? Any last pieces just to bring up there before we move on to our sum up discussion?
Hit me a Brad already summing up.
I
I think
That's why I
that's
checked.
kind of natural though. I think it's so tied in with the length of this album that by the time you get to track 14, you are going to be summing up in your head. And like either way, whether you're doing a critical review or not.
One thing I will say, just before we move on to the sum up, on Smoke and Mirrors, I wrote down a note. We sure do talk about music that references New York a lot. And there are a lot of New York references. I think on this album, Banks is from Maryland, unless I'm mistaken. So East Coast, all not too far away from it there. But yeah, between St. Vincent, Lana Del Rey, we've had a lot of New York here recently.
Conway,
Conway,
Conway.
Buffalo. Yeah, which is
Buffalo.
New York. Buffalo is New York, so.
Yeah, but we're talking New York City, really, aren't we? When we're saying New York.
No, Lana Del Rey was upstate New York. She was referencing in her album.
Okay, well.
Banks is from Queens. Yes, there were a lot of Queens references there. Thanks, Dreadlocks. Really appreciate that.
We should have really had him on for this. Think about it now.
No doubt. And feel free to...
Although it's gone for an hour and 40 so far, so...
Well, like you say, I think we're at a good point to move on to our sum up discussion. And Dreadlocks, please feel free to give us your thoughts too. I will do my best to communicate those back to the group here. But Brad, why don't you get us going this week?
There is a lot of great lyricism on this album, and Banks is someone that will pull you in. There are a lot of dubious production choices on this album, and what I wouldn't agree totally that the beat selection is lazy. There are some for me that stand out as being, at least in my head, bad. You've got that like horrible auto-tune vocal effect coming through on like a couple of these tracks, which is probably a personal thing, and it's probably fairly relevant to the three of us here, but I don't think any of us are really massive fans of that style. There's one beat where I think the piano part is like objectively just out of tune with the rest of the beat. Yet still somehow Banks manages to kind of pull you back in with his lyric writing and themes, and that he saves the album in that way. As long as it is, the lyric writing does get you kind of stuck on it. Whether it would work better as two separate albums, released 6 months apart, maybe that would have been the way to go here. I think attention span is a lot to do with it, but 18 tracks on an album these days is almost unheard of. Unless it's a concept album or something like that, it's just too long.
Don't disagree with anything you said, Brad. I think this album's got a lot to really like. Lyricism, technical rapping. If you're a hip hop purist and you come to it for the rap, you're gonna love this. If you're a bit more like me and you come in for the beats and the vibes, probably not as much. Which I'm assuming is why you guys are coming for this as well. There's a lot to like here, and ultimately it's let down by one thing, and that's the fact that they just didn't seem to be able to edit themselves down, which is a shame because I feel like this could have been a really good entry into the kind of canon of hip hop that is coming out at the moment in that style, the kind of, for lack of a better term, boom bap Griselda style. It could have been a really cool entry into that, but it ends up being ultimately mostly forgettable because of the length.
Or it could have been two really fucking good mixtapes and one okay mixtape.
I think maybe calling, splitting this up and saying it's a couple of mixtapes and things like that maybe okay. I think the straight up just like, could you cut this into two and release it as two separate albums? I mean, okay, I'm drawing on my own, experience as a listener to things like that, but like, fuck me, you could sew the trilogy albums up by Green Day any way that you want, and you're not going to get a good fucking album out of that. So I always feel like, just saying like, hey, what if we cut it into more? It maybe doesn't solve a lot of the problems. I would say that's probably the case again if you're talking about chopping this into a couple of albums. Surprise, surprise, the length isn't something that works for me either. I don't detect, I think, a lot of lyrical themes, a lot of, a thematic construct that carries through a lot of these songs anyway. It very much does feel like a collection of songs. I think you put it really well when you said a playlist earlier, Cam. It does feel a lot like that to me, which is why I'll say there was one listen this week where the length worked really fucking well for me. And that was when I went out for a nice long drive on Saturday or Sunday morning. It was perfect. I was out for a couple of hours. Well, yeah, just about a couple of hours on the roads, and had this album on. It was a really, really good fit for that. Really, really good fit for that. Not so much, I think, when I was driving through some villages, and you guys know what kind of car I've got. It's maybe not one that fits the perception of myself that I put across on these streams, but driving through sleepy Buckinghamshire villages with the windows rolled down with lots of words which I absolutely cannot say right now going on. I got some books. Yeah. Well, yeah, no, exactly.
The world's biggest exhaust.
Yeah, just for anyone that doesn't know, Matt has a Ford Focus RS. Is that right? One of the proper boy racer cars.
Mark III. It's definitely a bit shabby. Fucking love it.
In neon blue, in the kind of blue that lights up like from about 2 miles away.
I love my baby so much. Please don't let me start talking about her on this stream because we will not finish in time. But yeah,
Ballpark Motors.
Yeah, Ballpark Motors for sure. This album did fit that very specific circumstance quite nicely. Anywhere else, it doesn't fit.
It's interesting as well because I've been following this on Reddit a bit over the week, and I've heard quite a lot of people, or read quite a lot of people saying, yeah, the mix doesn't work for me, but it sounds great in my car.
Yeah.
And I've not listened to it. I've not listened to it in my car, so maybe that is something that we're missing out on with the slightly odd mixing decisions.
And cool.
I only have a tape player, so I can't listen to it anyway.
Oh boy, that would be a lot of tapes to fit this on, wouldn't it? But yeah, Brad, coincidentally, Reddit, another place where you see lots of words that you can never say under any circumstances, most certainly not on a stream. I go back and forth. I've mentioned it a few times, but like the attention span that I have is particularly short for a human being, full stop. So I never want to put that on an artist. Never want to put that on an artist. And I think especially one who, as we have all said, is putting together something that is written so consistently so well, right? There are a lot of long books that I struggle with because I just cannot fucking sit still for long enough to read them and get through them. So I always view that as a me problem more than anything. So, what I do absolutely want to make sure that I do not minimize here is that there are a lot of good songs on this record. Our displeasure, I think, Brad, as you said, may be down to the way that we listen to this more than anything, because, we do have to sit down, have these concerted focus listens. It's very easy to get through an Olivia Rodrigo sour, which is 30 minutes long. It's a lot harder to carve out enough time to sit down and do that with something that is over twice that length. But don't take our words as gospel. Never do anyway, but certainly in this instance, don't. And make sure that you listen to songs like Formaldehyde, Crown, and even Dishonorable Discharge. I can't say that they're anything other than good ass songs. And there are a lot of other examples on this album. Course of the Inevitable doesn't make my rotation, mostly because I worry that it would mean that no album would ever have enough times to be played if it made that. But yeah, there's some really good songs on here.
There's some songs that definitely make my rotation if I was more of a playlisty guy. The likes of Formaldehyde would probably get in there. I really, really like Early Exit. I don't know if that's just because I like Rock Marciano, but I really like that track. Not too many of the later ones would make it, but certainly ones from that first 6 would definitely make my rotation. I don't know. I don't think you can put it on me to expect me to sit through an album that doesn't feel like it warrants being as long as it does. Like I said, I got no problem with a long album. There's lots of long albums that I really like. There's lots of really long hip hop albums that I really like. You know, but it's just never feels like it justifies its runtime. It feels like it happens over and over again where it gets to points where you're like, well, this must be the end of it without looking at the track listing, and it's always 5 or 6 songs out from the end. For me, it's just too much of a problem to look over, so I can't put it in my regular rotation for that.
I just want to address this super quickly because we're running short on time here. But the one thing I will say, you've said a couple of times, it doesn't warrant its length. But I think we have all said consistently, and particularly about that final set of tracks, it's where the best writing is. Does that writing not justify it? Does it not warrant it?
I think
Not
it's the
really
fact.
for me.
Yeah, I think it's the fact there's not an overarching kind of theme or progression to the album. I think if it was a story that was stretched over to that length, and then you got to the juiciest and the best bits in the last 6 tracks, then it would totally warrant it. But most of these tracks work perfectly well on their own, and like it comes back to the theme of chopping it up. Like, where could you chop this up and it not really hold its own ground? Like, you could chop it up in a number of different ways and it would still kind of work. There's not an overarching message over the whole album, for me at least, that I realized that says this album has to be 18 tracks long. You could easily split it into 2, or you could easily split it into 4 really good mixtapes.
Really, really good EPs. I just feel like the reason that I don't feel that way is because you could just take the better lyrics or the better themes and put them earlier in the album, and lop off these last 6 beats, and you wouldn't notice for quality, right? They don't do enough to lift up how repetitive it has got by that point, how stale it feels by that point. Lazy it feels by that point. There's no other way of putting it. The beat selection by that point just feels lazy to me. It feels like I've got verses, I want them on there, I'm just gonna put any old beat. Just
Look.
just not great.
I think your point about moving that stuff forward earlier, that's probably fair, and I think that's the right rebuttal to that almost rhetorical question that I was asking there. I think I'm ultimately with Brad on the lazy point, but there you go. Brad, I'm not sure whether we've heard you say rotation, not rotation. I think we've gotten a sense, but we got to hear the words, man. We got to hear the words. We can't be free from this prison until we hear those words.
Not rotation for me.
God, Cam freed himself from the prison anyway. Jesus.
He's gone for it. Yeah, not rotation for me.
I
Simply,
stood on my plug.
I don't. Nice. I don't ever really envisage myself kind of listening to this from track 1 to track 18 again. there are some great tracks, there is some great writing, but not enough to pull me in for the whole thing in its entirety. So not in rotation for that reason.
There we go. A unanimous judgment from our point, but again, I will stress, please go ahead, listen to this, because there are some gems on there, and make your own mind up. But we will leave the course of the inevitable there, and we will look ahead to next week. And hey, you know how I said we have a bunch of music coming up over the next few weeks that I can't wait to listen to all of it? Well, next week we're going to do something entirely unrelated to music. Cam, do you want to try and explain our left field idea for next week?
I think it's that. Well, I mean, it's left field for us, but I don't think it's that left field.
It's not left field. Yeah, it's left field for us.
I was gonna say, people do this. No, I think I should address the fact that there's no good albums that came out today.
Kenny
I don't
Hoopla
believe that.
mixtape's pretty fucking baller.
Don't believe you. Anyway, as much as I want to listen to an AFI album in 2021, we're gonna watch the Scotland game and do a watch along, aren't we?
Yeah.
Because music isn't sports.
Yeah, we're just gonna watch sports instead. Sports is sports, though, Brad. That's fine.
Exactly.
Ballpark sports.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a little bit of a weird one. I mean, Cam, you're you are off on assignment for a good chunk of next week, so we knew we were going to be tight for preparation next week. Anyway, thought it might be nice to just have a break, try something else out, and we've got people who like watching along with us here who are probably going to want to watch a little bit of football on at the minute. I noticed that Italy have won 3-0 in their game while we've been talking tonight. But, the Euros...
Sorry?
Italy won 3-0, I think.
I was saying Forza Azzurri.
Oh, right.
I'm following Italy, right?
Yeah.
And it's go for the Blues.
Bad times here.
So, we're going to do a watch-along for the England-Scotland match next Friday at 8 o'clock. So we're going to have the game on. We're going to be sitting here chatting away, having a few drinks, probably asking a few musical-related questions that we can try and draw some relation between the Euros and England and Scotland and the football as it is ongoing. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit fun. I can't wait for you guys to explain to me how you get a home run in soccer before then.
Who are you going to be supporting?
I'm English. So
yeah, that's going to be that's going to be a 2v1 situation, I think, next week.
Yeah, I hate the English football team, so I'm going to be supporting Scotland. Sorry.
Fair play. Yeah, I review Paul Gascoigne's rap song. I tell you what, Dreadlocks. I think we should all go and listen to that and come with some notes for halftime. That's gonna be our halftime show. Talking about Paul Gascoigne's rap song. But yeah, come and join us. Come hang out here with us next week. It's not going to be the most incisive football commentary that you're going to get. As I say, I'm sure I will be supporting England. I think from the comments you guys have made, that's not so much going to be the case. So at least we're going to have a bit of conflict as we tend to on these streams anyway, which will be good. But yeah, so if you're watching us on YouTube, probably going to be a gap next week. I don't think are going to upload our watch along to YouTube. So enjoy a week off from that, and we will be back strong the following week. But yeah, I think we are just about at wrap up time here. If you are live with us here on Twitch, thank you so much for joining us. And if you've missed any of this discussion or want to hear it again, we'll have a recorded version of this going up on our YouTube channel on Sunday. If you are watching that recorded version, we won't be going live again next week to talk about an album. As we said, we'll be going live for our Euros watch-along stream. Please do come along and join us. Shout out again to Millie Draws a Lot on Instagram. That's spelled with a Y for all of the wonderful graphics. If you want more Lloyd Banks, yes, more, even after the 18 tracks, head over to his website. And if you want more Ballpark music, then follow us on Twitch. Subscribe to us and hit the bell on YouTube and check out our link tree. That's at /BallparkMusicUK, where you can find all of our socials. At this point in my script, I have down Cam. Did you enjoy it tonight? He came back just at the right time. That was fucking awesome. Did you have a good time tonight?
Yeah, up until that, my cat almost just jumped out the window and I had to say that's why I went.
Oh boy.
Yeah, we have like a balcony and she was like right on the edge, and then there was a seagull flying past. It was quite the minute for me.
All right, cool. Brad, how about you? Did you have fun?
Yeah, not as dramatic as that. What can I say?
I mean, you know, top to bottom, I have enjoyed this as always. We will see you all next time. Stay safer than Cam's cat.